A Northwest Ohio family is still searching for answers more than 6 decades after someone murdered a young child.
Police say her killer abducted 14-year-old Nancy Eagleson in 1960. 11 Investigates has learned authorities looked into 300 suspects over 62 years.
And lead investigator Brian Duggar uncovered no murder in this small community has ever caused so many rumors and conspiracy theories.
She dressed me up for Halloween, went Christmas shopping. When she pulled me uptown for candy, she would always get the black licorice and get me the red. Just a wonderful big sister. I mean, there was 9 years between us, so she was like a second mom.
The date was November 13, 1960. Paulding, Ohio, a town of 2,300 residents.
My name is Cheryl Garza, and I am a sister of Nancy. And I was with her on November 13th, 1960. This was beautiful back in the day. And all these beautiful lights under here. And then the sidewalk had like little sparkles in them.
You know, Cheryl and Nancy are walking home ultimately from the movie theater in downtown Paulding. They stop and have some drinks at a local restaurant a couple blocks away, and then they start to walk home, which is, you know, maybe equivalent to 4 or 5 town blocks.
So as we was walking around the corner there, she was holding my hand, and I noticed a car behind us going real slow. And I remember looking over my shoulder, and I looked back at her and I said, "Nancy, I think someone's following us."
As they're near their residence, a vehicle pulls up to them, described as a dark-colored 4-door vehicle.
Right in here, a little ways is where he started asking if we wanted to ride.
And he rolled his window down and he said, "Would you girls like a ride home?" And Nancy said, "No, thank you, we're almost there." And he just kind of creeped along with us as we walked. And he said it again, "Would you girls like a ride home?" She said, "No, thank you, we're almost there."
He ultimately parks the vehicle on the road, gets out, grabs a hold of Nancy, ultimately abducts her, throws her into the vehicle.
Threw her in the back seat, and then he's in here like this. And I couldn't see what he was doing, so I jumped on his back, and he just went like this and pushed me to the ground.
So when I fell back on the ground, I just realized that this is a bad man. This is not a good man. I jumped up, ran up to the neighbor's house. It was Mrs. Larson, and she would babysit for me once in a while, so I knew him well. And I knocked on the door, and I kept watching the car, and he was just fumbling around in his pockets and everything. And when she finally came to the door, he had just closed her door. But as he did, I seen her in the back seat setting up with her head laying on the back seat of the car, like she was out, she was knocked out.
And seconds later, 14-year-old Nancy Eagleson was gone. Years after the abduction, Nancy's mother, Betty, wrote a letter about her teenage daughter.
For several months, I had been begged and pleaded with for some high heels like the other girls were wearing. She knew we couldn't afford the added luxury right now, but she also knew she would get them in time to come. As usual, like all mothers do, I gave in to her pleading. On November 12, 1960, she purchased her first high heels. The next day would be Sunday, and her first chance to trip around in her clackety-clack shoes.
Sunday morning, like all Sunday mornings for the family, was spent in church.
After services, the girls had missed their ride home. They decided that it would be fun walking such a short distance. Nancy, thinking that missing her ride meant she was unlucky, she stated to a friend that it must be her unlucky day, noting that it was the 13th of the month.
The girls made it home from church, but after seeing a double feature later in the day, the world exploded for the Eagleson family. Nancy's body was found just hours after she was abducted near her home.
And I remember sitting in my dad's lap, and they just, "Mr. and Mrs. Eagleson, we're sorry to tell you, but we found your daughter, and she is dead." And my dad jumped up, and they had to restrain him, of course. But I I didn't realize exactly what happened, you know, what it all meant. And finally, you know, they had to explain to me I'm never going to see her again. That she's gone.
The assailant, after he abducted Nancy, drove about 7 miles or so towards the city of Defiance, just about to Junction, Ohio, and pulled just off of State Route 111, maybe a quarter mile. State Route 111 takes a 90-degree turn. This person went straight onto what's County Road 176, and just about a quarter mile down, there's a woods there that today many people call Nancy's Woods. And it's on the south side of the road, and ultimately that's where her body was found several hours after the abduction.
62 years, the emotion is still strong.
You know, I'd never see my sister again. It's so hard because I've, over the years, I've always blamed myself. Because I was the last one to see her, besides the man that killed her.
Betty Eagleson died in 2018. She died without answers.
She was a loyal Girl Scout, an average freshman, Cheryl's big sister. Her second mother would never roam the street again and shop at Christmas for the right present for us, her family. I miss her so.
In the days, weeks, and years ahead, investigators hunt for her killer, and somewhere along the line, all the evidence disappears.
That will always forever be one of the issues that even I, again, who wasn't alive in 1960, had nothing to do with this, will have a black eye because this evidence is missing.
Our hearts really go out to Cheryl, huh? I mean, that had to be so traumatic for her being there. Brian, you and our 11 Investigates team have spent months combing through every twist and turn in this case.
And you said everybody has a theory on what happened or who did it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the one thing that really jumped out to me while digging into this story. Everyone who remembers the case seems to have a theory about who did it. And everyone is 100% convinced that their theory is the truth. Some think it's the local man, others say he's from out of town. But the truth is no one really knows for sure yet. Reporting live in studio, this is Brian Duggar for WTUL 11.
All right, thank you, Brian. And this is just the beginning of Nancy's story and the mystery that's haunted this small town in Northwest Ohio for more than 6 decades. 11 Investigates uncovered mistakes in the early days of this investigation and evidence that's just disappeared in the case. We're working on putting that story together for you tomorrow night at 11.
Well, last night we brought you the chilling details of the abduction and killing of a 14-year-old by the name of Nancy Eagleson. It has been more than 60 years since her killing in the small village of Paulding. That's right along the Indiana line.
There is so much to this story. Mistakes made by police, hundreds of suspects, rumors, and conspiracy theories. But in 1960, the small-town innocence of Paulding was lost as police hunted for the killer.
And to this day, the killer has never been found. Lead investigator Brian Duggar picks up the story.
Just outside the village of Paulding is a stretch of land known as Nancy's Woods. 2:30 in the morning of November 14, 1960, in those woods, raccoon hunters found the lifeless body of Nancy Eagleson. Hours earlier, the 14-year-old girl was abducted while walking home from the movies with her 5-year-old sister, Cheryl.
And I remember I was sitting in my dad's lap, and they just, Mr. and Mrs. Eagleson, we're sorry to tell you, but we found your daughter, and she is dead.
After we would all go to bed, I would hear my dad get up and go and check every door and make sure they were locked. So just all at once, you know, everything changed and everybody was scared.
I'd tell a lot of folks that this is the most emotional case in our county's history.
Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick. And
It's a case that Nick Edwards has spent hundreds of hours investigating for his podcast, True Crime Garage, but also as a member of the Porch Light Project, a nonprofit victims advocacy group. It assists law enforcement on cold cases and helped with additional testing in this case.
And you can make a strong argument that it was a local guy. It had to be a local guy. It had to be somebody that knew the area, knew that town very well, knew the people. But then you could look at every aspect of that as well and argue that no, for whatever reason, evil passed through here that day and took Nancy away.
Whoever the killer is, he is evil. The autopsy shows that Nancy was raped and shot once under her chin with a bullet passing through her brain. A sketch was developed based on Cheryl's description: dark hair, glasses, maybe early 40s, and well-dressed.
And this man was dressed, this boy, man, whatever, was dressed in a suit from church, like he just came from church. And he had a fedora on. Whether that's how he always dressed or was it something he put on to look older.
She says Nancy was thrown into the back seat and appeared to go limp just before 8 p.m.
So I smelled something, and when I told them I smelled something funny, at first they thought it might have been like beer. But then when I told him how he was messing in his pockets and doing something and I couldn't see what he was doing, and the way she looked when she left the drive there, they thought maybe that he might have chloroformed her.
A little more than 6 hours later, her body was found 7 miles away.
I've reviewed hundreds of homicide cases. Two things that stand out that are not typical are that one, that a victim is abducted and then found so quickly afterwards. I mean, she's found hours after she was abducted and killed. The other thing is where they located her body is not terribly far away from where she was abducted.
That immediately cast suspicion on Joseph Offrance and Kenny Nelson, who were spotted by a highway trooper coming out of the woods after finding Nancy. Offrance can be seen in a newspaper photo from the site where Nancy was found.
There were a lot of people walking about, milling about. There were even, 1960, there were even media people showing up relatively quickly. So yeah, there was a lot of that, and I didn't see much evidence that they really blocked off the area and secured the scene very well.
After the discovery, police received several tips. One involved the city of Antwerp. A man knocked on a resident's door at 1:30 in the morning, asking how to get to a city in Indiana. He was described as having dark hair and glasses, matching Cheryl's description and a composite sketch. Nancy was found on Route 176, which leads directly into Antwerp. Whoever the killer is, he left a young witness behind.
I thought for sure that he might come back and get me. And I thought, I knew at 5, I thought, my mom and dad couldn't protect her. They're not going to be able to save me either.
At one point, Cheryl believes the killer did return while she was staying at her grandmother's house.
The back door come flying open. And I screamed so loud. And my mom come running up to get me. She thought that I cut myself or something. Saw the door open, immediately grabbed me off the chair and went to the other room to call my dad and my grandfather. And then they got the police, and they came over, and they had found a knife or a screwdriver, I'm not sure now it was a knife or screwdriver, on the back porch. They had pried the 2 locks that were on the door.
But the argument for an outsider materialized years later in Mark Hodges. In the mid-1960s, Hodges was accused of shooting a young girl and later killing a woman near Perrysburg. He was not convicted at either trial, however, but he did later spend years in prison for sexually oriented offenses. A law enforcement official told us he was in a nearby bar the night of the killing. An interview with Hodges convinced Sheriff Keeler that he was their man, according to 2 law enforcement sources we talked to. But none of the evidence could tie him to the scene. And that evidence has vanished.
That will always forever be one of the issues that even I, again, who wasn't alive in 1960, had nothing to do with this, will have a black eye because this evidence is missing.
At one point, it was taken to the Toledo Crime Lab, but Toledo confirmed to us that it does not have it. No one knows where it is or how it disappeared.
Obviously something happened to it at some point, well before my career here. And you know, and again, in this case, it's unfortunate because there was great evidence, I believe, at that time that would have brought a resolution to this case, again, probably before I started my career here.
I found it.
But weeks after talking to Sheriff Landers, a possible break in the case came during an 11 Investigates interview.
Ta-da! Haven't had it out for a while.
My goodness.
Wow, what a way to end.
A little dramatic development there, Brian. So tell our viewers a little bit more about what we just were talking about. You saw there at the end, who that man is exactly.
Yeah, tomorrow night we're going to introduce you more to this man. His name is actually Don Roanhouse, and his name kept coming up over and over during the course of our investigation. So one day we decided to just stop in unexpectedly and hear his story, and his story really was pretty shocking. And what I can tell you, because of that interview, that gun that you just saw is now in possession of investigators. And we'll break that down more tomorrow night. Wow.
Now, over the last 2 nights, our 11 Investigates team has brought you the story of Nancy Eagleson, the 14-year-old Paulding girl who was murdered in 1960.
No one has ever been charged in the case that stripped away the innocence in the small western Ohio village. Tonight, we bring you what we found related to Nancy's murder.
And as you will see, we believe there is reason for hope that this case could one day be solved. Lead investigator Brian Duggar picks up the story.
You know who gets lucky in these cases? The killer. The victim doesn't get lucky. She didn't get lucky at all that night. Nothing went her way.
For decades, Nancy Eagleson's murder has haunted the village of Paulding.
I started having nightmares.
14-year-old Nancy Eagleson was scooped up off the street near her home, raped, murdered, and left in woods outside of town in November of 1960. Her younger sister Cheryl witnessed Nancy being dragged away, and because of that night, the nightmares are still vivid.
And I would actually chase my sister down the road and ask her who killed her. Because I knew in my heart that was the only one that could tell me who it was.
I was within 10 feet of the car.
But during our investigation, we found another possible witness.
I know the shape of the car, I know the shape of the taillights, I know what the seats look like, and I think she was going to make a move to the front door, but he grabbed her and pulled her the rest of the way over. Then she got up, and he pulled her down again by the hair, and she never came back up.
He says they were spotted by the man and the killer took off. His Corvair couldn't keep up.
It happened so fast.
He says he went to Sheriff John Keeler, but that report doesn't exist. He believes he saw a police car, and the absence of the report, according to him, proves the sheriff wanted to bury his information.
Oh, they've never called me, asked me nothing. And there's a good reason, because they knew who did it.
There are a lot of local people who have developed the opinion that John Keeler is responsible for covering this crime up. And I didn't know John Keeler from the Man in the Moon, but I can't think professionally that anybody would be corrupt enough to try to do something like that.
In fact, there was a lot of evidence that was initially collected. But now that early evidence is gone.
So there's a lot of ways that these things can be lost. Am I excusing that? No, nobody would excuse that. Sheriff Landers doesn't excuse that.
To lose evidence in a homicide case that's, regardless if it's solved or concluded, is just irresponsible. You know, shoes and purse, and just things of that nature would be physical evidence that we should still today have in our possession, and we don't.
A lot came up missing. We don't know where it's at. We don't know if it'll ever turn up. But we've waited all this time, and it's since 1985, when I went to the Sheriff's Department. They didn't have it. We know it's not there since then.
A Paulding County judge revived hopes of a family searching for answers in a 1960 murder today. The judge approved the request of Nancy Eagleson's family to exhume her body to search for DNA evidence.
You've done a great job. Thank you so much. I didn't want to exhume her. I didn't want to do that at all, but I knew it was the last thing to give her the justice she deserves.
The heart-wrenching gamble paid off. Shockingly, a bullet was found in the casket in late October. A second autopsy done in Toledo changed the cause of death to multiple gunshots. Now that the bullet has been found, the gun is the key piece of missing evidence.
I've got what I think is the gun that killed her.
While talking to Roanhouse, he made an unexpected claim.
I've got it sitting in the office in a plastic bag. Ta-da! Haven't had it out for a while. The guy I got it from told my sister at a class reunion that he had the gun. It could be the murder weapon because somebody sold it to him 2 weeks after that happened. He said, I have to get rid of this gun.
And that gun appears to be a .22 caliber, the same caliber used to kill Nancy.
Other stuff has disappeared. It ain't going anywhere until it gets to people who's going to test it.
And it will be tested. After being told by 11 investigators of Roanhouse's statements, a BCI agent picked up the gun, and it will be compared to the bullet in Nancy's casket, possibly providing a break in the 62-year-old mystery.
I believe there's hope. I won't ever give that up. So that's all I can do is just ask if anyone has anything, please come forward. Find it in your heart to come forward and tell us.
It would be wonderful to give her some closure after a traumatic 62 years. A lot of people have been working on this case for that 62 years. Where does this investigation go from here, do you think?
Yeah, we need to get that evidence tested. And I talked to the sheriff earlier today, and you know, the evidence when they exhumed the body back in October, they got some fibers, they got that bullet, but it's kind of stuck in the BCI lab. It's just been sitting there since October. But the sheriff is hopeful because we now have the gun that they want to compare to that bullet. He's hoping that they kind of expedite the testing.
And that whole exchange, just to bring people up to speed, that was random, right? That you guys were in there interviewing that man and he said, I've got something to show you.
It was completely random. I mean, we knew that he had been telling people that he had witnessed a crime, but we did not know that he actually thinks that he has a murder weapon. At one point he said, as you saw there, I think I have the murder weapon. And I actually said, what? Can you repeat that? Yeah. You said you had the murder weapon? And he's like, yeah, it's in my office. Yeah. And I mean, it really was surreal. And then he goes into his office and would not let us come back into the office, which, you know, I don't really know anything about this guy other than he's going to get a gun. And so, I mean, we were a little worried.
Well, it sounds like you really cracked something open here. Look forward to hearing more about it. Thanks, Brian. All three parts of our series can be found on WTOL.com and our WTOL 11 YouTube page. If you have information on the case, reach out to the Paulding County Sheriff's Department.
In February, our 11 Investigates team brought you a 3-night series on the 1960 murder of a Paulding girl. Since that time, a possible murder weapon we discovered was examined by investigators. But now, there could possibly be another break in the case, again, because of a tip our team received. Lead investigative reporter Brian Duggar has the update tonight.
About a week ago, a woman living in Texas reached out to us with a horrific story of alleged abuse. Abuse that she says began in 1956 when she was living in Paulding, Ohio. She had seen our series in February and wondered if her attacker could be the same man who killed Nancy Eagleson in 1960. And the man she told us about, his name was already on our radar from another tip we had received months ago. When you think about him possibly being involved in Nancy's case, Would you believe that's a possibility based on what you know about him?
Yes, I do. Definitely do.
For more than 60 years, investigators have tried to answer the question, who killed Nancy Eagleson? The mystery still hangs over the village of Paulding. Stories and theories still passed down through generations. The 14-year-old girl was walking home from the movies on a warm fall day in 1960 with her younger sister Cheryl. A man approached them, grabbed Nancy, then threw her in the back seat of his car.
Threw her in the back seat, and then he's in here like this. And I couldn't see what he was doing, so I jumped on his back, and he just went like this and pushed me to the ground.
So when I fell back on the ground, I just realized that this is a bad man. This is not a good man.
Hours later, Nancy was found dead, shot twice. She was sexually assaulted. Her body was discovered in what is now called Nancy's Woods. It's a secluded area, but an area that's well known to locals. Over the years, the suspect list has grown, and now there's a new addition.
It was getting close to dark.
Over a 2-year period, beginning when she was 6 years old, Cindy Geyer Keefe says one man destroyed her childhood. Claire Bud Paulus, a former Paulding County Sheriff's deputy. The Geyer and Paulus families were close. The wedding photo of Cindy's parents has Virginia Paulus, Bud's wife, standing to the bride's right. Now, 11 Investigates can confirm that after our series aired in February, the Sheriff's Department received what it considered a credible tip about Bud Paulus in relation to the Nancy Eagleson case. Now, prior to that, Bud had not been considered any type of suspect in this case, but that tip continues to be investigated. Now, we have not previously named him, and we can tell you that Cindy reached out to us not knowing that we already had information about the same man.
I remember him cuffing me, cuffing my hands, and pulling me from the main door that goes into their house, pulling me by those cuffs, by my hands, and pulling me kind of backwards, and pushed me into the back seat of a car.
She says he took her to the jail. Then, she says, she was sexually assaulted.
And then I remember being locked in the jail at this specific time, this one time. And he was holding a gun to my head.
On November 6, 1987, Paulus was indicted by a Paulding County grand jury, accused of abusing another girl. A record of that indictment doesn't exist, but the sheriff's office and former prosecutor John Webb confirmed to us that it did happen. Paulus then killed himself, shooting himself in the chest with a .38 caliber handgun. No police record exists of that incident either, but 11 Investigates was able to obtain the coroner's report. And this isn't unusual. Over the years, missing evidence has continued to stymie the Eagleson investigation. Blood, hair, clothing, and semen evidence, it's all disappeared.
Obviously something happened to it at some point, well before my career here. And you know, and again, in this case, it's unfortunate because there was great evidence, I believe, at that time that would have brought a resolution to this case, again, probably before I started my career here.
Paulus's wife, Virginia, is now 98 years old. And that's why I wanted to. We attempted to talk to her, but she closed the door on us when we mentioned allegations against her husband. She still lives in the same home in which Cindy says she was allegedly assaulted, abuse that Cindy says changed her life forever.
It destroyed my personality. It destroyed every bit of my being, really. It made it hard for me to trust anybody.